can think about that. As always, it seems appropriate to start with what I think of as the party line. That is the Book of Common Prayer. And so here's what we're told officially. This is on page 861. Holy matrimony is Christian marriage in which the woman and man enter into a lifelong union, make their vows before God and the church, and receive the grace and blessing of God to help them fill their vows. Now, I think the most important thing to point out is that what the church describes as a sacrament is also a term of law. And there is a kind of tension between the law of marriage and the tradition or custom and sacrament of marriage. And that those complications have played out for 2,000 years in terms of the way the church has handled things. So what I want to start with is if you could start sharing some pictures now, Nancy. I'd like to start with a picture of a wedding taking place in France. Can you share with us now?
Yes, one moment. I had it all set up. And these screens get in the way. Can you see it?
No.
I don't see anything, but I don't know anybody.
Hold on. Sorry.
Oh, that's a start.
Here we go.
Okay, sorry. All right.
There we go. This is the picture. So I'm sharing this with you just because I have such fond memories of the moment. It must be, I don't know, okay, what, 20 years ago, 25 years ago?
Yeah, 25 now.
Yeah. This is a wedding of the daughter of our best friends in France. This is a tiny little village in the foothills of the Pyrenees where the family has probably lived for the past 2,000 years. And she's on her way to get married from the family home, which you see right, the building right behind her and her father there, Rene, is the family home. And we were lucky enough to attend the wedding. And I had no idea what a French wedding was like at the time. And so this was a kind of surprising moment that it's a tiny town. So you walk, you don't drive anywhere. And we all got dressed up, and you see people off to the right dressed up, and they're going to follow along, the family. And they're walking off, and I thought, oh, good, we're going to the church. The church is at the other end of the street. And then to my amazement, we stopped at an office building halfway to the church and went into what turned out to be the mayor's office. And the mayor, who was also the local bishop, just an average in tiny town, the mayor was a part-time mayor, but he had his best suit of clothes on, and he had his blue, white, and red sash on, and he welcomed them to the table, into his office, and the immediate family crammed into the office, and all the witnesses kind of looked in through the windows, and he got out his official registry of marriages, and they signed the register. And he said, congratulations, you are now married. And in law, they were. The Republic of France had now officially registered them as a married couple. Now, what interested me is that after that, these people are very devout traditional Catholics. So we then, including the mayor, all got up, got back in line, and marched down to the church and had a very traditional, what I would call Catholic wedding mass. But the interesting, which I did not know, and this is the point I want to make, is that if they had gone right to church without stopping at the mayor's office, that was a crime. It's not merely in bad manners to get married in a church. It's illegal to get married in a church. You can go have a sacramental rite. You can have a church wedding that the church thinks is the marriage. But as far as the government of France is concerned, they run marriages. It's not a function of the church, it's a function of the state. And the more I thought about it, it's not entirely alien to our own experience. So give me my next picture of the Norman Rockwell painting.
Nope.
Nope, that's not Norman Rockwell, I
No,
guarantee.
it's not. Where did Norman go? Hang on. Sorry.
Maybe you lost him.
I hope not.
Oh no, it's the one with the window, the big window.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
So thank you. That's lovely. We all know what's going on here. This young couple is about to get married, but before they can do so, they have to go off to the county. Actually, you can see the sign up there, marriage licenses. They have to get a marriage license. They can't get married without a license. It's against the law for a minister to marry somebody without a license. So it isn't just France. It isn't just a very secular republic. Even here in the United States, there's a distinction made between legal marriage and sacramental marriage, or between real marriage and religious marriage. And maybe you put it that way if you're a lawyer. And what we really want to talk about today, or what I want to briefly talk about, is the origins and the history of this tension between church and state. Unlike the other sacraments, marriage way preceded the coming of Christianity and the coming of Christ. It goes all the way back to the very beginnings of human history. And now I want my picture of Adam and Eve.
Oh boy. Hang on. I've
Sorry.
got two. I found the first one that you sent. I like this one a lot.
Okay, we'll go with that one.
I can show both.
It's funny, I couldn't find a picture of them where Eve isn't handing an apple to Adam. I wanted to get one that was relapsarian, but this is clearly before he's bitten the apple, that's for sure. And
all these animals, they look so concerned.
Well, but they're also living in peace, right? They don't eat each other.
True.
The lion is standing next to the lamb, that kind of thing. And this is just really more an amusement point, I think. But when I started reading the kind of religious history of weddings and marriage, I had no idea how controversial the relationship between Adam and Eve was for theologians. There's a long debate going back to the earliest history of the church, probably going back to the earliest history of Judaism, about whether Adam and Eve were married before the fall, or whether they had sex before the fall. And I don't fully understand the theological argument, but it really matters to people. But everything that we do agree, it is certainly agreed that after the fall, they had sex, they had family, they were married. Although I don't think there's anything in Scripture that talks about a wedding ceremony for them. So what we've got here is a tradition that goes back to the origin of species, I guess we could say. And not surprisingly, it's pagan law and Jewish law and practice that not only antedates but underlies subsequent Christian tradition. Marriage was strongly supported by the Hebrew tradition. In the Old Testament, marriage is sort of presented as an extension of kinship. Marriage is the way in which you move from one kinship unit to another. And already from the 8th century BC, the very earliest biblical writings in the 8th century BC, the relationship between God and Israel was likened to a marriage. And because it's likened to a marriage, there followed therefore that marriage would be thought of as monogamous. There's only one God, there's only one marriage, one spouse at a time, not a one spouse period. It's certainly true that in the Old Testament, it was a patriarchal society. Marriage was not a liaison between equals. Men were the head of the household. This was in the very literal sense a patriarchal society. That's also the Roman tradition, the pagan tradition. Roman law regarded marriage not as a sacrament, but as not as a sacred relationship, but as a contractual relationship, a kind of formal agreement between two people to be married, but it's not an agreement between equals. The Roman law had we still use the term head of the household, And the Roman law had the power of the patria potestas, the rule of fathers. Actually, in Roman law, husbands and fathers had absolute power. Even they had the legal right to kill their wives, children, and slaves if they wanted to. They owned them entirely. But it was a contractual relationship. It was entered into, and it could be taken out of. But when a woman married, she moved from the authority of one father figure to another father figure. All right, we're ready for the marriage at Cana now. Now, marriage has been particularly important within the Christian tradition, if for no other reason that it's at the wedding at Cana. This is a representation of the wedding at Cana. You see the 6 urns of water there that Jesus is about to convert into wine. It's his first miracle. And it's always been thought of as significant that he performed his first miracle at a wedding, sort of sanctifying it. Mm-hmm. So from the earliest days, Christians have viewed marriage, from the earliest days of Christianity, Christians have viewed marriage as divinely blessed, lifelong, monogamous, between a man and a woman. And just as for Jews, the relationship between God and Israel was likened to a marriage, for Christians, the relationship between God and the church became like that of a marriage. Still, and I think, well, we'll just keep the pictures up. They won't do any harm, but I won't be commenting on pictures for a while. There were reservations. Paul was the first Christian writer to speak about marriage, and as you probably recall, he was very suspicious of marriage. He didn't. He regarded marriage as a concession to human corporality, a necessary concession, but an unfortunate one. He wrote, this is, some of you must remember having to read 1 Corinthians 7, where Paul writes, "Now for matters you wrote about, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. But since sexual immorality is occurring, each man should have sexual relations with his own wife, and each woman with her own husband. I say this as a concession, not as a command. I wish you were all as I am, that is, single and celibate." So clearly Christianity has always had a kind of ambivalent feeling about marriage too. It may or may not be a blessed relationship, but it's not a necessary one. Indeed, throughout much of the church, there's been a feeling that it's an inferior relationship. Building on the examples of Jesus and Paul, a lot of the early church fathers saw celibacy and freedom from family ties as the preferable state. One of the earliest ways we have seen this is so many of the early martyrdom stories, about women martyrs. It turns out they're martyred not just because they're Christian, but because they won't get married and they're being persecuted by the society because they won't marry a non-Christian man. And as we know, the church attitude about women was complex, but by the end of the first century, the patriarchal tradition was deeply embedded. And you know these as well as I do from Ephesians 5, husband is the head of the wife, wives must submit to their husbands. And in Colossians 3, where Paul insists that wives should subordinate themselves to their husbands. So that's the kind of early Christian attitude that lasts till the 4th century. But like everything else in the 4th century, things changed once Christianity became not a persecuted religion, but a required religion. Remember, it's in the late 300s that Christianity becomes the established church, and it becomes a crime not to be a Christian. And under those circumstances, the church came to assume a lot of functions of state, including managing marriage law. So a kind of Christian law of marriage had to develop. So Augustine, who's writing around 400, is the first to describe marriage as a sacrament. although he doesn't mean sacrament in our sense, but as a sense of one of the formal rituals of the church. Augustine wrote, he was the first person to write about the marital relationship being symbolic of God's relationship to us. Even so, the medieval church strongly insisted on the superiority of virginity and abstinence, even within marriage, and the church sort of reluctantly accommodated marriage, but condemned sex other than for purposes of reproduction. Thus, the theology of the church accommodated marriage, but continued to prefer celibacy and, of course, insist on celibacy for clergy. This ambivalence about marriage is reflected in the lack of any formal liturgy in the early church. By the 400s, by the 500s anyway, the church had developed formal liturgies for communion, for baptism, for confirmation, but there was no religious ceremony for marriage. It was not important for the church to bless weddings. People were expected to marry by mutual agreement in the presence of witnesses, but a priest didn't have to be present. And in fact, essentially what they used was the old Roman pagan liturgy of marriage. It's not till the 900s that for the first time we find any kind of written description of what you might call an explicitly Christian marriage ceremony. Think about how late that is. And even then, when it did become more formal, it was still different in the sense that men and women confer the sacrament on each other by their expressing of consent and an exchange of vows before God and the church. But it's not the church that marries them. They get married in church, and the church witnesses it. Not till the high Middle Ages, 1100s, 1200s, that there's a formal sacramental theology. And it's not till the 1100s or late 1100s that marriage is first described as a sacrament as we know it now. The first declaration that marriage was a sacrament was made in 1184 at the Council of Verona. Think about how late that is. It's not till 1184 that the church formally says marriage is a sacrament. And they did it essentially because there were pagan movements, particularly Catharism, that were saying marriage is not a sacrament. Like everything else, marriage was changed by the Reformation. Protestants, who insisted that only baptism and communion were sacraments, rejected the sacramental nature of marriage and even began calling for and allowing divorce. And it's in reaction that the Council of Trent, for the first time, reiterated formally the doctrine that marriage is a sacrament, even though it continued to state that virginity or celibacy is to be preferred in all cases. But it's only after the Council of Trent that weddings required the participation of a priest as well as two witnesses. Now, as we all know, things have changed even since the 1500s. Modernization has revolutionized marriage in ways that were unimaginable to our predecessors of 5 centuries ago. Both Protestants and Catholics came to accept the idea that sex without the desire for procreation was acceptable, that it was okay to have sex for pleasure, or as an expression of affection without deliberately seeking to create children. And simultaneously, the early modern focus on children and the family and the Protestant openness to female participation changed the balance of power between the sexes. With the coming of Protestantism, women are much more independent and are treated differently within marriage as well as outside of it. Of course, in our own time, marriage is just, what are we to make of marriage now? Just think about it. Reliable contraception, modern feminism, the widespread acceptance of homosexual intersex love has completely revolutionized, even from when most of us were young. Cohabitation outside of marriage is normal. since the beginning of the 21st century, most companies, well, I shouldn't say most, many countries in the world allow marriage of same-sex couples, although that means politically contentious in the United States, as we well know from what happened today. And there are many churches even now that will celebrate same-sex marriage. Nancy, do you know, does the Episcopal Church allow any kind of celebration of same-sex marriage?
Yes, the Episcopal Church does. It must be. There's a process that a congregation must go through in order to accept the possibility of blessing same-sex marriages.
But it's allowed. It's not considered heretical or something like that.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, that's a big moment, I think, for most of us. Anyway, let me. The question is, what do we make of all these changes? Let me give you my last picture of Snow White and Prince Charming. All right. Most of us, I won't say everybody, but most of us grew up, I think, with a kind of fairy tale image of marriage, right? You meet the one, the special one, you fall in love, you get married, you live happily ever after. It's interesting. One thing I learned is that, in America, fairy tales always begin and they lived happily ever after. In France, it always ends with, and they got married and had lots of children. Now, I don't know what you make of that difference, but I thought it's an interesting cultural difference between the two. But anyway, Disney well illustrates the way we were brought up to imagine marriage, but I think we all agree the fairy tale is in doubt nowadays, or it's least contested. We've all of us lived through the sexual revolution. I remember one of my friends was talking about this the other day. He commented kind of ruefully. He said, I lived through the sexual revolution and I never fired a shot. most of us may not have been among the revolutionaries, or we may have only been marginally revolutionary, but we all know that we've lived through a revolution that is just, I won't speak for anybody else. When I think of back what the world was like in the 1950s, when I was coming of age, it's just mind-boggling how much the world has changed. What's normal, what's accepted, what's allowed, what's legal. It just, everything has changed in a way more than it changed in, I think, literally thousands of years. We've lived through really remarkable, or we're living through remarkable times. And so I thought what we should talk about tonight is, we are all of us veterans and legatees of the sexual revolution and of the revolution about what marriage is. And so let's talk for a while about what are weddings and marriages like for those of us who live in this post-revolutionary world that is so skeptical about the sacred nature of marriage and even more skeptical about the possibility of living happily ever after. To help you think about this, I shared 3 movie clips with you. I hope some of you had the chance to look at them. How many of you had a chance to look at them? Good. That's great. I hope you enjoyed them. I mean, I think the 4 Weddings is just, the mangled Episcopalian wedding it's just exquisitely funny.
Yeah.
I
have not seen that movie, but it is on on my list of movies to see now. I'd seen 2, so I was familiar with those. But
there's just something. One reason I like is because it shows that the ritual doesn't have to be performed, but they're still married. It's still their day. I remember when we got married and something went wrong, somebody said to one of us, "Oh, that's good. If something didn't go wrong, you wouldn't have anything to remember." You got something to remember and talk about always. I showed the best years of our life just because I love it so much. It's one of the great American movies. I don't know how many of you had ever seen it before. It's an old movie, but it's made in 1946, and it was a,
I remember seeing that movie. I was probably about 8 years old.
well, you're a lot older.
And it was, I did not really realize what movie it was until they started putting the ring on.
Yeah. Anyway, that the veteran in there without the hands was a real World War II veteran, and this is to some extent his story as well as the other people who are coming home from the war and adjusting. But I think it's just a beautiful kind of example of a home, low church, but very moving, I think, wedding, you know. And then in some bizarre ways, my particular favorite is the African Queen.
Oh, yeah. Remember that
again,
one too.
I don't know how many of you had ever seen the African Queen. It's a movie, but it's a great one. And I like it for so many ways. I mean, for one thing, it's just wonderfully acted. I think the way Katharine Hepburn kind of fluffs her hair. They're about to be hung, but he comes up with this wonderful idea of sort of sanctifying their marriage, what has happened to them and their adventure on the African Queen. And then, of course, as I said, it's a wonderful line. I now pronounce you by the authority vested in me with Kaiser Wilhelm II. I pronounce you man and wife. Proceed with the execution, which is just, but it just, I thought it went and captured the real importance. Here are two people at the, facing death.
Mm-hmm.
They still want to get married. It matters to them, with good reason. But it does, would you think to ask for that if you were about to be executed? I don't know. Great moment. And then, of course, it turns out that the wedding is a miracle because of what you didn't see the final scene of the movie, but the wedding saves their lives.
Well, and it wasn't just important to Bogey and Katharine Hepburn. The captain was moved. It's sort of like the Christmas Story.
Yeah.
In 1914 in World War I, that the enemies have this thing in common.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a wonderful thing to add. I agree. Anyway, I just thought it was just three different visions of weddings, so as always, I'd like to hear, just your reflection. I think most of us here either are or have been married. And I just think we should go around and say, which of the movies did you like and why? What was your wedding like? If there's anything you want to share. To what extent did the fact, if you had a sacramental, maybe you were married by a justice of the peace, maybe you were married by a priest, to what extent did the sacramental nature of your wedding make a difference in your life? So I don't know what I'm going to hear, but I'm sure we all have something worth saying. And I think I'll just go around my screen, and my screen may be different from yours, so bear with me. Let's start with you, Carol.
I have, I was married twice. My first husband left me with a young child. I came back, I was in Abilene. I came back to Austin, and we had been married by a Baptist minister, which we both knew. And I still don't believe in divorce. I really don't. And I didn't at that time, but that doesn't say that. Let me finish my story and you will understand. And I went to talk to Brother Sluter about my situation. And he told me, he said, Carol, just because when I said in that ceremony, what God has put together, let no man put asunder, it's quite obviously God did not put you and Don together, which really helped me go through my divorce. Second time I got married, I was married by a justice of the peace. I did it completely opposite from the first time. And we were married for 43 or some odd years before my husband passed away. So, and it was not a smooth, happily ever after marriage, but it was one that we both loved each other and put up with one another's faults. So, but the fact that when he said, just because I said what God has put together, let no man put asunder, it's quite obviously God did not put you and Don together. But he, the fact that I had a beautiful, wonderful, still have a fantastic son from that marriage. So it was worth every minute of it. And I do not regret it at all.
Thank you. Thank you. Chris Rhodes.
Okay, so I've been married 34 years. My wedding is interesting because you got two different cultures, right? So you have this boy that's raised Church of Christ, son of an elder in the Church of Christ. Parents were missionaries in Honduras. And then you have little Roman Catholic girl from the south side of Chicago. He's a Houston boy. I'm an inner city south side of Chicago Roman Catholic. I did not know that I was an act of rebellion for him. I thought I was a Christian, but I didn't know they didn't see me as one. It didn't count if you were Catholic, I guess. So I had some tricky business because remember, I'm Greek. Like my big fat Greek wedding is a documentary. It's written by a Greek girl from Chicago. I'm telling you, my Greek mother did not even know why people were laughing. So I had to deal with these two families coming together and how to create peace. And so what I did was we asked his father to marry us. So we got married in a little chapel because we couldn't get married in the Church of Christ because they didn't believe in instrumental music. So we got married in a little chapel, like in their subdivision, and he did the service, and it was a Christian ceremony that he wrote. So, yeah, that's my wedding.
That's great. Kim.
Beautiful. I was just going to say, that's a beautiful story. It really is.
Kim Coyer.
I had to unmute myself. So, gosh, I guess I might have a story a little similar to Carol's. But I was married and got married in the Catholic Church. So it was the big Catholic wedding. It was the church I grew up in. That I'd gone to school in, as I was at a Catholic school. And so we did the whole thing. It was really a beautiful, wonderful ceremony, beautiful day. And it was great. But our marriage didn't work out. My husband divorced me when my two daughters were young, still in elementary school. So I've been kind of a single mom for a really long time. And I haven't got remarried yet. I am dating somebody that will probably get married to eventually, but we're just not in a super hurry. But yeah, for a long time, I just was focused on my kids. They're both older now. So one's 20 and one's going to be 24. So now I finally have a little bit more time, but when they were little, I didn't, I just was really just focused on, getting through life with them. So that's my experience, but I still a beautiful thing and hope to get married again someday.
I think somebody said about remarriage, it's the triumph of hope over experience. Jan Dugan. You got to unmute. Yeah. Go.
Yeah. We started dating while we were at New Mexico State. I started there and she moved in. Her uncle was the dean of admissions, so she got in with the dean to get into the school. But we met at the student union watching a movie and shared a cup of water to put our cigarettes out. And so we started, I guess, kind of liking each other. And I was in ROTC and I would be commissioned, and I was headed for Vietnam. So that was back when Vietnam was a big deal. So I said, I think we need to wait until, I get back from wherever I'm going. And she says, well, if you do that, I won't be here. So we decided, okay, well, I kind of like you enough that probably I don't want you to not be there. So we got married. I got commissioned, and she was supporting me because she was a teacher and I was a student. But we had almost 56 years, ups and downs. It wasn't all fun, but it was part of what we were. And two great daughters, 6 great grandkids, and now grandkid-in-law that I still think is blood for me. But we would have been married 56 years, 6 weeks before she passed. So anyway, it was a great adventure for both of us. We did a lot of stuff together. We did a lot of stuff separately, and we got along better than most people, I think. But it was I don't know what to say. It was relationship that we both enjoyed, and I still miss her.
Mhm. Amen.
And for those of you who did not have the privilege of knowing Mary, I could hear her saying to Dan, well, I might not be here. I can really hear her saying that.
I guess it's Mike and Lori Mahaffey.
Hi there, I'm Laurie and Mike is sitting over in his chair. Mike and I met as freshmen at the University of Texas, and we were both just looking for someone to date, and we ended up just being completely smitten with each other at the age of 17 and 18. So we dated all through college, and we got married the week after I graduated. And I think partly because both of our parents had sort of rushed wartime weddings. My parents eloped and Mike's parents had a very small wedding. The idea was, oh, you're the first kids to get married. Well, how about a big wedding? And so we had a big, beautiful, wonderful wedding. Both our grandmothers were there. And I think we had 250 people, but these were in the days of cake and punch in the church fellowship hall wedding. So there wasn't like, dancing and food out the wazoo. No, not in the Baptist church. But anyway, it really has been quite a ride and we're still crazy about each other. And some of you know that Mike's job left town. And so he lived somewhere else for 24 years off and on. And so if people ask about that and say, well, how was that? I said, well, if he were in the military, I mean, he would be getting shot at. So at least he wasn't being shot at. He was just away for work and then came home every 3 or 4 weeks or so. So anyway, we have 2 wonderful kids. Our son is 43. Our daughter is 40. And we have those 2 cute grandkids that we brought one of them to the Looptoberfest, which was great fun. And we're just blessed to still be together, still be upright, walking around, and still crazy about each other.
That's great. I'm reluctant to do this, but Kay, you go ahead and then I'll correct you later. How's that?
I'm checking out now.
Well, I'm thinking about our wedding, and it was in many ways one of the distinguishing features I think I mentioned right at the end of last week, which is my father had died. So it was my brother-in-law who gave me away. And he said to me, as we were just about to go down the aisle, it was the first time he'd worn shoes and not boots in however many years he couldn't remember, because, and when Carol mentioned Abilene, he was a rancher in Abilene. So he always wore boots. And he had one of those things in their house where you get your boots off by, pulling it against this wooden thing. And
boot
I don't know
jack.
what you call it, but it was
A boot jack.
a boot jack.
Yeah.
And Paul and I had met in a very romantic setting at the Paris Opera. And it turned out that when he came down, I met his mother and stepfather for the first time. And my mother had come over and visited, so he had met her. But it was when I wrote and said to my family that I was going to marry somebody whose name was Paul Solon, my sister said she didn't know whether he was French or what, because I just said that, he was a really wonderful guy. And I have appreciated many things that people have said, because we've been married now over 50 years. And I don't want to say this definitely, but I think I look younger than my grandmother did when she was my age. Actually, my grandmother never quite got as old as I am now, because she died in her late 70s and I just turned 80. And Paul is much older than I am. He's 81. And it's just been amazing to me that the time has flown. And when people talk about the grandchildren, many of you know the reason that we're in Austin is because of Francisco and Jojo and their treasures. And coincidentally, we love not just Kasha, but Ron. And then we have a son who's still in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is where we moved from, because we were over there in Minnesota for nearly 50 years. And he said, as we were planning to move, he said, well, the grandchildren won out, because our son we love our son, but he's married, but he never had any kids. And we just thought, we're getting old enough that we could be of help to them. And probably at some point, the chances are, if we still hang around, that we might be dependent on Kasha and Ron, and maybe on our grandchildren to help take care of us. So it's marriage is a lifelong thing, often, not always. But when Paul mentioned about, the variety of things, when I look around at the people that we're good friends with and the various people that they have married and or haven't married, or relationships. And I have a good friend here that I went to high school with, and she has a daughter who is married and lives in Canada. And she said she doesn't tell her family, never discusses the fact that her daughter is a lesbian and has a daughter herself, because she said her family would disown her. So that, when you look around at today's world, there are just all kinds of relationships that are ongoing with love, but not necessarily the ones that we would have anticipated when, for example, when we were in high school.
Okay. Well, strangely enough, I don't see anything to correct, so I'll just move right on here. Kevin Phillips, are you lurking behind that photograph, or?
Hey, Paul, aren't you supposed to ask Nancy to say it and then I correct her? Wasn't that the way?
If you prefer, I
Good luck with that, Kevin.
made a random choice here. I don't want to get in the middle of something, I'm sure there'll be nothing to correct. You go right ahead.
There you go. Nancy and I also met at the University of Texas, and we met in the University of Texas Martial Arts Club. She walked in, and I said, boy, that girl is cute, but she has a boyfriend that she brings with her every week. And my friend said, that's not her boyfriend. So the rest was history. Although my instructor wanted to take her out too and threatened not to give me her phone number. So we got married at All Saints right on campus, and Dina Harrison performed the ceremony, which was amazing. And it was pretty much love at first sight for us. So we literally were together almost every minute because we were both searching for somebody, a good character. Let's put it that way. I like to have fun. Nancy, what did I leave out? Oh, she's not talking to me. I must have messed it up.
Where are you, worship tech?
You've got your microphone off, Nancy. Doesn't count.
There you go. Perfect. See, nothing to add.
Exactly. No, so just to embellish a little bit, so we were married at All Saints Episcopal Church on campus by Dina Harrison when she was a brand new associate rector at that church. And many of you know that she went on to become the bishop suffragan, which is second to the bishop of the Diocese of Texas. She had a long, fabulous career. And in fact, there's a new space at the Seminary of the Southwest named after her, the Harrison Library. And I say all of that because we were lucky enough to be connected with her early in her career. But she gave us what I thought was the best advice that I've ever heard given to anyone who's getting married. And I know it can't always apply, but what she said was, no matter what happens, you need to believe that your marriage is non-negotiable. Because that if you have that bedrock, you can get through anything. And that, I mean, I think it's really helped us, and it's advice we've given other people. And the other thing that she has said when we've seen her here and there occasionally since then is, you two are some of my best work. And that is such a compliment coming from her. And I don't feel like we live into it as much as we could, but I hope we continue to try.
Right. Let's see. Who am I? Amy and Eric Schwartz. Can you?
Okay. Emily says she's coming back.
I'm just starving. I'm sorry.
Ta-da! Well, we met probably in the high school football stadium stands in the band section. We went to high school together. I was actually better friends with her big brother, who had just graduated from high school before she came in. But we knew each other in high school. Kept touch kind of
Okay, wait
in
a
the
minute.
following
I
years.
have to just stop
Okay.
this conversation.
She's
Okay.
gonna go.
He he blew my parents' mind, and this is an important thing to say up front. So we were friends in high school. He's 2 years older, but Eric decided he was kind of ahead of his time because the rest of us would just do what we were supposed to do, which was we were supposed to go to college right after high school. And and everyone that we went to school with, we were supposed to go into a profession.
Mhm.
Well, he just wasn't sure that's not what he wanted to do.
I was really not convinced that what the work I was doing in school was productive or the right thing.
So we went to a dance together. It was because he's in the same grade as my older sister. So it was like a senior girl dance, right?
yeah, this was in high school.
This was in high school. So
when
we went
she was a senior.
together. So he was at my house, okay, and I'm upstairs getting dressed. So he and my dad have this conversation. And Eric explained to him why he was not going to go to college. And so, then we went off to the dance. Okay, so but this really stuck in my father's mind. This is important because
And most of you have seen her father at church,
yes,
sitting in the front row with us when they come.
and my dad thought that Eric gave such a great, well-reasoned argument, and he was just so thankful that this was not his son having this discussion. Okay, so you have to fast forward now that I'm 28, and we happened to meet again after 8 years, and there was chemistry and all this stuff. So I was not very close to my parents, and but he asked me to marry him, and so he went to go talk to my parents. Okay, so he goes down and he's talking to them, and of course my mom's main concern is he degreed? Was like the first thing out of her mouth, apparently. So anyway, so but that's kind of so what's really been good, because our personalities are not alike, and so it has been a journey because we do not think the same way, we do not approach things the same way, but it's been really great to have the connection that we have from that early in our life, because it'll actually be our 27th wedding anniversary next week on Thursday.
Well, happy anniversary.
Yeah,
Happy
so
anniversary.
it's, I think for me, for us, Bennett is going to join us. Being buried in the church is, I think it's a critical part of, at least for me, but I think for you too, about, it's a critical part of our relationship, and kind of also like what Nancy said, that it's non-negotiable. We committed, and even though at times, because we just don't think the same way, but we didn't in high school, so I was well aware that was not, that was not the way things would go. But yeah, it's and so that's also because we actually got married in the Episcopal Church. We chose that because we were both raised Presbyterian, but that's a whole other story. So anyway,
We'll get to that another time. We better move on. Kim, can you give us
been a while. So, I met Brian on Texas OU weekend in 1979. And 6 weeks later, 6 weeks, Thanksgiving, we got engaged, and he took me home. I took him home to meet my family, and he took me home for Christmas. And I was raised Catholic. I had a Catholic church. My mom insisted that we wait. I think as the track we were on might have been to elope at New Year's, when you know. But we got married in June of the following, after 6 months. If my daughters came home and said they were doing that, I would have forbade it. But we have been married 43 years.
so far so good?
We were married in the Catholic Church, and Brian was a cradle Episcopalian, and I was Catholic, and so we did the first 20, well, almost 20 years. Not, I don't know how many years, but we've been Episcopalian longer than we were married, than
Okay.
the Catholic. So that was our story. We're still living it.
Good. I like that. We're still living it. That's a great line for a wedding.
Yeah. we're still-
I got one screen left. It says iPhone 7. Now, I have no idea whether we have somebody named iPhone 7 in our group, or whether somebody lurking behind iPhone 7 would like to say something.
That's my cell phone.
Oh,
It's
okay.
my check. It's my sort of my check.
Okay, well then.
Make sure
I-
things
I
are
feel-
operating well from the user perspective when I'm trying to run this call. So that's who it is.
Well, let me just wrap up by saying, this is one of the times I wish we had a little more time because, the one thing is I think only one of us was married in a secular wedding. And it would be interesting if you, Carol,
My
you,
second one was, yes.
everybody else had a church wedding of one sort or another.
My
Yeah.
first one was a church wedding, but I opted to make sure the first one didn't work out, so I went for the secular one. But
So
I do
just-
have a comment about marriage in Texas. There's all you have to do in Texas to be married is present yourself as husband and wife.
Yeah.
And you are legally married. I
Yeah,
worked with a young woman that she and her husband went down on the courthouse steps and just said, "We're married." And that was to them as far as the legal marriage, that's all it takes in Texas.
Well, there are a lot there, that's what's called common law marriage. And I can think of one very famous Hollywood star who lost a lot of money because of that law. But that I didn't want to go there in this conversation. So Nancy, you better wrap us up here with a
Okay.
closing prayer.
I will do it.
We'll do next week. Maybe we can come back to this a little bit and move on.
Great.
Thank you all. It's just been great to hear from you.